The 1970s marked a turbulent yet fascinating decade in the history of the American automobile. It was an era of contrast. On one hand, a golden age for raw horsepower, aggressive styling, and vehicles that redefined speed and attitude on the streets. On the other, it was a decade plagued by fuel crises, emissions regulations, and economic struggles that forced automakers to make compromises few enthusiasts were happy about. The result? Some of the most legendary muscle cars ever built, standing shoulder to shoulder with some of the most disappointing attempts to carry the torch of performance. The 1970s muscle car scene wasn't just about cars, it was about culture. These machines represented freedom, rebellion, and identity. They were loud, unapologetic, and bold. But as the years wore on, cracks began to show. Some models soared to iconic status, while others crashed into mediocrity. Today, we're diving deep into both sides of the story, the best and the worst muscle cars of the 1970s. The muscle car boom at the start of the 1970s. The decade began with a bang. By 1970, the muscle car wars were in full swing, with major automakers locked in competition for dominance. Performance was everything, and the early years brought the highest horsepower figures ever seen in mass-produced American cars. Big block V8s ruled the streets, with some models producing over 400 horsepower right off the factory floor. It wasn't just about numbers. Styling became more aggressive, with bold lines, shaker hoods, and wide stances. Advertisements flaunted quarter-mile times and 0 to 60 runs. Cars weren't just transportation. They were statements of power and individuality. Yet, even as these machines roared to glory, dark clouds loomed on the horizon. Rising insurance premiums, stricter emissions regulations, and the looming fuel crisis meant the golden era couldn't last forever. The best muscle cars of the 1970s. Plymouth Hemi Cuda, 1970 to 1971. The Plymouth Hemi Cuda wasn't built for quiet Sunday drives. It was built to intimidate. With its shaker hood scoop bobbing with every rev and its wide, low stance, it looked ready to devour asphalt before you even turned the key. And once you did, the 426 Hemi Fiv 8 roared to life, producing 425 horsepower that could make tires squeal in protest faster than you could say, "Hold on." But the real magic of the Hemi Cuda lies in its scarcity. Production numbers were so limited that even back then, spotting one on the street was like seeing a unicorn rumble through a parking lot. Collectors today treat them like rolling treasures, and auction prices prove the legend only grows with time. On the drag strip, challengers lined up knowing they were in for a fight, but few could match its raw power. The Hemi Cuda wasn't just a car. It was the badge of honor for anyone lucky enough to own one, and still stands as one of the ultimate symbols of muscle car dominance. Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454, 1970. If 1970 had a heavyweight champion in the muscle car ring, the Chevelle SS 454 would have been wearing the belt. Under the hood sat the LS 6454 V8, officially rated at 450 horsepower, though many drivers swore it had more muscle hiding under the paperwork. This beast could storm down the quarter mile in under 14 seconds, straight from the factory. No modifications, just pure Chevy firepower. But it wasn't all about speed. The Chevelle SS had the looks to match its strength. Its wide stance, bold body lines, and menacing front end made sure everyone knew what was lurking under the hood. Pulling up in one was like arriving with an announcement. Yes, this car is fast enough to back up its attitude. For Chevrolet, the Chevelle SS wasn't just another model. It was the poster child for performance. It represented the high-water mark of the muscle car era, before regulations and fuel concerns began trimming horsepower across the industry. In 1970, though, the SS 454 stood tall as one of the fiercest machines on American roads. Pontiac GTO, 1970. By 1970, the Pontiac GTO had already earned its place in history. After all, it practically invented the muscle car formula back in the mid-60s. The 70 version didn't just rest on that reputation. It came ready to keep the throne. Buyers could choose from a lineup of potent V8s, with the Ram air packages delivering brutal acceleration and a soundtrack that made exhaust notes feel like music. Then there was the Judge. Not a nickname, but an actual package that turned the GTO into something truly unforgettable. Bright colors, decals, rear spoilers, and enough street presence to make everyone take notice. This wasn't just about speed, it was about attitude. Even as regulations started creeping in, the GTO in 1970 was still a dominant force. It remained the muscle car that others measured themselves against. Whether at a stoplight showdown or parked on Main Street, the GTO had the aura of a legend. And while its decline would come soon after, in 1970 it stood at full strength, bold, loud, and unapologetically fast. Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, 1970 to 1973. When Pontiac introduced the Firebird Trans Am in 1970, it was clear this wasn't just another muscle car, it was a statement. Where others were built for straight-line drag racing, the Trans Am combined power with sharp handling, making winding back roads just as fun as the quarter mile. That balance gave it a reputation few rivals could match. Under the hood, things only got better. By the early 70s, Pontiac introduced the legendary Super Duty 455 engines, renowned for their torque, durability, and brute force. These engines weren't just quick, they were practically indestructible, giving the Trans Am a reputation as both fast and tough. Visually, the Trans Am was unmistakable. Hood scoops, spoilers, and bold stripes made sure it turned heads, even standing still. While other muscle cars began losing their edge as regulations tightened, the Trans Am kept the spirit alive. By the mid-70s, it was carrying the torch for a fading era, proving that muscle could still be stylish, capable, and exciting long after the peak years had passed. Chevrolet Camaro, 1970 to 1973. The second-generation Camaro rolled out in 1970, and it was clear Chevrolet wasn't just repeating the formula, they were refining it. Longer, lower, and sleeker, the new design gave the Camaro a striking presence. This wasn't just a reskin, it was a leap forward in both style and performance. Performance models like the Z28 and SS made sure the Camaro's bite matched its bark. With engines ranging up to the 396 big block, these cars were more than capable of putting serious rubber on the pavement. The Z28 in particular was a favorite among enthusiasts for its balanced mix of handling and power, a car that could attack curves and straights alike. What really set the Camaro apart was its flexibility. It could be built as a comfortable daily driver, a serious drag racer, or anything in between. That versatility made it one of the most beloved cars of the era, appealing to gearheads of all stripes. Today, those early second-gen Camaros are celebrated as some of the finest muscle cars ever made. 1970 Ford Torino Cobra. Ford might have been known for the Mustang, but the Torino Cobra was its muscle car heavyweight in 1970. Equipped with the 429 Super Cobra jet, it cranked out 375 horsepower and came with drag strip-friendly gear ratios that made it a menace in straight-line racing. In factory form, it was a street-legal car with serious race day DNA. The Torino Cobra wasn't just about brute force, though. Its fastback design and wide stance gave it a unique look that stood apart from the more familiar Mustang and other competitors. It had presence, a certain "don't mess with me" aura that muscle car fans couldn't ignore. While it never achieved the same fame as some of its rivals, those who know performance history respect the Torino Cobra as a true muscle machine. It was Ford's answer to the demand for bigger, meaner street cars, and it delivered. On the drag strip or cruising the boulevard, the Torino Cobra had all the muscle credentials to stand with the best. Dodge Challenger RT, 1970 to 1974. When Dodge unveiled the Challenger RT in 1970, it was like dropping a bomb into the muscle car wars. Unlike some competitors, the Challenger offered something for everyone. Buyers could start small with 6-cylinder engines or go all in with the monstrous 426 Hemi. That level of customization made it a hit among gearheads who wanted their ride tailored to taste. The design was aggressive from every angle: a long hood, wide stance, and styling that screamed power even before the engine turned over. But when it did, especially with the Hemi option, the Challenger RT was nothing short of ferocious. It quickly built a reputation in drag racing circles as one of Chrysler's crown jewels. The Challenger wasn't just Chrysler's answer to the Mustang and Camaro. It was their statement that they could outmuscle just about anyone. With its combination of style, power, and options, it carved out a loyal fan base. Decades later, it's remembered as one of the defining cars of the golden era of muscle, a true legend of the street and strip. The shift. The early 70s gave us some of the most powerful muscle cars ever built. But then, reality struck. In 1973, the oil crisis sent fuel prices skyrocketing, and suddenly, cars that guzzled gasoline were no longer practical. At the same time, federal emissions and safety regulations began to take a toll. Engines were detuned, compression ratios lowered, and catalytic converters sapped performance. Insurance companies, wary of high-horsepower cars, began charging exorbitant premiums. The golden age ended abruptly, and automakers scrambled to adapt. Unfortunately, this led to some of the most disappointing vehicles ever marketed as muscle cars. The worst muscle cars of the 1970s. AMC models: Javelin, Matador, Pacer. AMC always seemed like the scrappy underdog of the muscle car era, but by the 1970s, their lineup leaned more awkward than awesome. The Javelin at least looked like it belonged in the conversation, with long lines and some racing heritage. But performance? It never quite matched what Dodge, Chevy, or Ford was putting on the streets. Then came the Matador and Pacer, which took questionable styling to a new level. Instead of striking muscle car aggression, they leaned into bulbous shapes and quirky designs that confused more people than they impressed. AMC did show glimpses of ambition. The Rebel machine, for example, had real bite. But those moments were rare, and their 70s cars were more likely to end up as the punchline of a car meet than the highlight. In an era when muscle cars were about raw power, tough styling, and intimidation, AMC was often stuck explaining why their models didn't measure up. Collectors today may see them as oddball curiosities, but back then, they were just reminders that not everyone nailed the formula. 1978, Ford Fairmont. By 1978, Ford seemed to forget what made a muscle car exciting. Enter the Fairmont. Practical? Yes. Efficient? Sure. But when it comes to performance, it had all the thrill of waiting in line at the DMV. The engines were choked down by emissions equipment, offering little more than an uninspired hum when drivers wanted a roar. Acceleration figures were closer to economy cars than anything resembling the Mustang's fiery past. Styling didn't help its case either. With plain, boxy lines, the Fairmont looked more like an office commuter than something designed to light up a drag strip. The muscle car badge felt like a cruel joke to enthusiasts who remembered the fire-breathing machines of just a decade before. To be fair, the Fairmont was reliable and affordable, and it fit the times as America shifted toward efficiency. But as a so-called muscle car, it was the equivalent of a deflated balloon at a party. People weren't fooled, and the Fairmont became a symbol of just how far the scene had fallen by the late 70s. 1978 Chevrolet Malibu. Chevrolet had once ruled the streets with the Chevelle SS, but by 1978, the Malibu carried only the shadow of that legacy. Downsizing was the word of the day, and while the Malibu slimmed down, it also shed just about everything that made its predecessors exciting. Engines were weak, capped by regulations that squeezed the life out of horsepower figures. Even the V8 options struggled to muster enthusiasm, leaving drivers wondering where all the power had gone. Design didn't do it any favors either. Instead of bold, muscular curves, the '78 Malibu looked cautious, like it was built to blend into parking lots rather than stand out on boulevards. Enthusiasts who expected a Chevelle successor got an economy-minded family car wearing a once-proud nameplate. The Malibu perfectly represented the late 70s struggle between nostalgia and necessity. It still carried a badge tied to muscle history, but in reality, it was a commuter dressed up in disappointment. For fans, the car marked the painful moment when muscle officially gave way to compromise. 1976 AMC Gremlin X. The Gremlin X might be one of the strangest cars to ever wear a muscle-inspired badge. On paper, AMC tried to give it credibility by offering V8 engines. In practice, those engines were smothered by emissions gear, leaving more noise than actual performance. The result was a car that could look aggressive in ads, but struggled to back it up on the street. Then there was the styling. Short, stubby, and chopped at the rear, the Gremlin looked like it was designed in a hurry. Some found its shape quirky and interesting, but most saw it as plain odd. Calling it a muscle car felt like a stretch, and enthusiasts quickly placed it in the novelty category. Still, the Gremlin X has managed to carve out a small following today, largely because of its weirdness. Collectors see it less as a performance machine and more as a conversation piece, something guaranteed to raise eyebrows. In the muscle car timeline, though, the Gremlin X is remembered as one of the least convincing attempts to capture the magic. 1977 AMC Hornet AMX. The AMX badge once meant serious business. In the late 60s, it stood for raw muscle, speed, and bold styling. By 1977, however, the Hornet AMX turned that heritage into little more than decals and trim pieces. Instead of delivering heart-pounding power, it offered engines that barely cleared the bar for excitement. Horsepower numbers sagged, and the handling didn't add much to redeem it. Visually, the Hornet AMX looked like AMC tried to fake aggression with stickers and stripes, but anyone who turned the key quickly discovered it was all show with little go. It lacked the muscle presence its name promised, and enthusiasts weren't impressed. As the 70s dragged on, cars like this showed just how far the golden era had slipped away. The Hornet AMX may have carried a famous badge, but it couldn't live up to its own history. Today, it's remembered less as a proud muscle car and more as a cautionary tale about what happens when performance is sacrificed for appearances. Legacy. The 1970s tell a story of extremes. The decade began with some of the most powerful, aggressive, and iconic muscle cars ever made. But by the middle of the decade, the combination of regulations, fuel shortages, and shifting consumer priorities brought the era crashing down. Yet, the legacy lives on. The best muscle cars of the 1970s are now some of the most collectible vehicles in the world, commanding six-figure prices at auctions. Even the worst models, while mocked in their time, have found niches among enthusiasts who appreciate their quirks. The 1970s muscle cars reflect a pivotal chapter in automotive history, a rise and fall that reminds us how culture, economics, and regulation shape the cars we drive. The 1970s gave us legends that still dominate car shows and auctions today, along with cautionary tales that remind us not every experiment works out. From the thunder of the Hemi Cuda to the letdown of the AMC Hornet AMX, this decade had it all: triumph, downfall, and legacy. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which muscle car from the 1970s do you think deserves more respect? And which one do you think is overrated? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into muscle car history, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more automotive breakdowns, and share this video with fellow car enthusiasts. Because at the end of the day, these cars aren't just machines. They're stories on wheels,